जय जय श्री राधे, सब वैष्णवों को जय श्री कृष्ण. Continuing with Varta 62, and it's day 84. Continuing the story of the king and the Vraja. He thought and thought. He decided to ask the king's personal servant to tell him what would make the king happy. So he took him aside and asked, "Please tell me what makes your king happy. I have been trying all night, but the king has not even looked up. What should I do now? I have taken a vow that if I cannot please the king, I will not leave this village alive. The king is not happy, or what might I do now? Please tell me. If he is pleased and rewards me, then I shall give you half of anything I receive. This I promise. In this way I may stay alive, otherwise I shall surely die." The servant piped up, "My king is only ever pleased with Vaishnavas. If you dress as a Vaishnava, the king will soon be happy." That servant then taught the Vraja all the ways of a Vaishnava. The Vraja then assumed the form of a Vaishnava, just as the servant told him to. When he had perfected that form, he returned to the court. As he entered, he greeted the court and the king with Jai Shri Krishna, whilst folding his hands together. The king stood up immediately. He went to the Vraja and embraced him. He held his hand and drew him into his own throne and made him sit there. The king stood in front with palms joined. He called for 5 new garments to be brought in, and he dressed the Vraja in them. He presented him with bracelet, earrings, rings, bangles, pendants, pearl and gold necklaces, chokers, head ornaments set with jewels and other items of jewellery. He also gave him horses, a chariot, a palanquin and all new furnishings, 1 large village and 1,000 rupees. He gave him and his entourage a lot of supplies and said, "Please tell me if there is anything else you need. I will serve you in any way I can." He stayed there standing with folded hands. Bhav Prakash. Here another big question arises. That actor assumed the form of a Vaishnava just to please the king, for show, and nothing more, nothing true. The king also knows this, so why did he show him so much respect? Why did he give the actor gold and jewellery, etc., that should have been for the Lord's use? The answer given here is that even the costume of a Vaishnava is non-different from the Lord's forms. The king's soldiers wear a uniform with the king's insignia, and the king respects that uniform, and the king's people respect him. In the same way, the dress and form of a Vaishnava is the form of the Lord's associates. Therefore, the Lord's servants, his accomplished Vaishnavas, all respect that form and bow down to it and welcome it. Thus it was that the king stood up immediately when he saw that form. The king was not honouring the Vraja himself. There is another meaning too. When the king embraced the Vraja, he was touching him, and there was a contact, and the king's heartfelt love for the beloveds was able to spring up in the Vraja in the same way that iron gets hot with the contact of fire. Iron becomes gold through the touch of the paras, stone. The Lord resides in the heart of that king who is an accomplished Vaishnava, and when the king embraced the Vraja, that love was able to take root in the actor's heart too. It was to that love of the Lord in his heart that the king welcomed the Vraja, adorned him and bowed down to him. Here it is shown that divine loving sentiment is the most important thing, bhava. It is through such divine loving sentiment alone that the Lord takes up residence in his image. That is how powerful it is. Therefore a Vaishnava should see the Lord in everyone and everything. Then the Lord will be pleased. Part 1 continued. After this, the chief minister and all the village businessmen gave much wealth to the Vraja. When morning came, he went back to his camp, still dressed as a Vaishnava. As he arrived there, he looked back and saw that 4 misshapen and foul-smelling women were following him. The Vraja turned round and asked them, "Who are you, and why are you following me?" They said, "We are 4 types of murder. We lived in your body. Murder of cows, of Brahmins, of one's wife, and of children. You assumed the form of a Vaishnava, and that is why we have come outside of your body. However, if you take off this dress, we will re-enter your body." The Vraja said, "But in this lifetime I have never killed anybody, so what do you mean?" The women replied, "In order to entertain people, you have feigned these 4 types of murder. You did only imitate these actions, however the guilt has still fallen upon you. We are those 4 types of murder." Bhav Prakash. The inner meaning here is that dharma, the righteous path, is extremely subtle. Even the thought of an offence in the mind can incur the punishment for it. This has been stated in the scriptures. After all, if you assume an identity and commit such an offence, then you also assume the guilt of murder. It does not even need to be said. For this very reason, Sri Acharyaji did not allow Vasudev Chakra to hide coins inside a fake shaligram, because it still had a sacred form and could not therefore be broken open. Even if the ceremony or installing a deity has not been performed, the Swarupa is established through divine loving sentiment. A Vaishnava should therefore always try to avoid offences done with mind, speech and actions. Part 1 continued. The Purveyor asked the woman, "So if I never dispose of this woman, what will you do?" Then the murdered women said, We would not be able to come anywhere near you, and so we would go somewhere else. Thereafter the Purveyor never dropped the form of a Vaishnava and actually became a Vaishnava. Bhav Prakash. This story recounts the importance of a Vaishnava's form. Thakurji, who was a Dhobi, previous Varta. When the king inquired about how the Dhobi had become a Thakurji, it was Harivamsji who had told him everything. Hearing all of this, the king considered, "Oh well, I have served this Thakurji for such a long time without knowing the story. Never mind, but what should I do now?" Harivamsji said, "Let me suggest one thing." The king piped up, "Of course, I will do whatever you say." Harivamsji said, "Go to Gokul and become a disciple of Sri Gosaiji. Then obtain another Sri Thakurji from Sri Gosaiji and serve that Sri Thakurji. Make another temple here and establish the new Sri Thakurji's Seva. Keep the old Sri Thakurji separate where he is and serve him there. Serve that Sri Thakurji in the way you have been serving him up till now. Apply the same amount of wealth and keep the same priests and temple servants. You do not need to do anything different." Bhav Prakash. Why? Because that Sri Thakurji had been Srinathji's Dhobi, and Sri Gosaiji had granted him that boon. That status of Shak Thakurji had been granted by Sri Gosaiji. Therefore, Harivamsji told him not to change the amount of wealth to be dedicated or the manner in which the seva should be done. Part 1 continued. Every day should go and bow down to that Dhobi Sri Thakurji once. The king did exactly as Harivamsji instructed. After a few days, the king arrived in Gokul with all his family members. After supplicating Sri Gosaiji, they were all initiated with the Lord's name and Brahma Sambandha. The king made extensive donations. He stayed there for some time and learnt all the ways of Seva in the path of grace. Then they went for the holy site of Sri Govardhanaji and made a tour of Vraj. After this, the king supplicated Sri Gosaiji, "O Maharaj, I would very much like to have a Sri Thakurji to serve." Sri Gosaiji brought a Swarupa, performed the establishment of the Lord's form within it, bathed the Swarupa in the 5 nectars, and dressed and adorned him, and then gave him to the king. The king then took his leave of Sri Gosaiji and returned home to his home in Marwad. He reached home in a few days. He had a new temple built and found an auspicious day and time to bring the Sri Thakurji inside. He then cooked some lovely preparations and offered them. Then, after performing the Arati ceremony, he invited many Vaishnavas to partake of prasad in the temple itself. Thereafter he applied himself conscientiously to the seva. In the daytime he would do all the seva with his own hands, and in the evenings he would read and talk about the Lord's pastimes. The Dhobi Thakurji would come every evening and listen from a hidden place. One night he appeared in the king's dream and requested him to place him in a suitable cavity in the wall outside the door of the new temple and to feed him a plate of Mahaprasad every day after the offerings were completed. "I don't need you to do anything else for me. Please send all the wealth from my temple to Srinathadwara." After this dream, the king did exactly as had been asked. Some time after this, Harivamsji was travelling to Gujarat. He came to the king's home and stayed there. There were about 25 other Vaishnavas with Harivamsji. The king welcomed Harivamsji and the other Vaishnavas very nicely, set up a camp for all of them and provided all of them with supplies, so they all prepared some very fine offerings, and after the seva had been completed, they all enjoyed very lovely prasad. The next morning, Harivamsji started to get ready to leave, but the king persuaded him not to go so soon. Every time Harivamsji wanted to set off, the king stopped him. He would just say, "All right, you can leave tomorrow, just stay for today." In this way, 1 whole month passed. The king sent sizable donations to Sri Gosaiji and Sri Govardhanaji with Harivamsji. The king sent him off with celebration and many supplications. He accompanied Harivamsji for a small part of the journey as he set off. He came home and re-engaged himself in the seva as before. He had great affection for the Vaishnava devotees. He was humble before them and served them well. He would meet with them and discuss the Lord's pastimes and sing his praises. He was always serving Mahaprasad to them too. He gave financial help to any of them who needed it and gave employment to some too. He never had any bad feelings towards any of them. He believed whatever they said and did whatever they asked him to. He never broke his word. Day and night he and the Vaishnavas were immersed in the bliss of the beloved's play. He served his Sri Thakurji with love and care and cooked very nicely for him. He would enjoy Mahaprasad together with the Vaishnavas. The Lord began to grant him his direct experience and asked the king for whatever he wanted. He would chat to the king whilst he was enjoying his meal. Sri Gosaiji was always very happy with the king. Whenever Chacha Harivamsji came from or went to Gujarat, then he would stay with the king, stopping there for 5 to 10 days. They would speak and sing about the Lord every night. Harivamsji told the king about the principles of the path of grace and some of Sri Thakurji's more private pastimes. Harivamsji was always happy with the king, who respected Harivamsji a lot. He would always serve Harivamsji very nicely. He would set up lots of festivals and facilitate Harivamsji in cooking lots of super preparations and then feed him with the Mahaprasad. The king also did whatever Harivamsji told him. Thus concludes Varta 60, the story of the Dhobi king, who was a recipient of Sri Gosaiji's great grace and accomplished Vaishnava. Truly, there is no end to his tale. Sab Vaishnavan ko Jai Shri Krishna, Aaj ke Anand ki Jai Ho. Thus concludes the reading for today, and we continue tomorrow with Varta 61. Jai Jai Shri Radhe.